Hi, I'm Jeff. This is Tropical Plants at 53 degrees north. So we're talking about BURRAGEARA Nelly Isler Swiss Beauty today. And before we start, I just thought you better know that I've got a little hairy helper today. Not a furry helper, a hairy helper. I believe there's a difference between hair and fur on a dog. I didn't know that. So I'm very much hoping that he doesn't disrupt things too much. Fudge, leave the glove. Fudge, I command you to leave the glove. Let's get started. And we are in. Okay, just before we get on to the orchid that we're going to talk about today, I just thought I'd show you this non-orchid. So obviously this is a Hippeastrum. Some people call them amaryllis, but that is incorrect, which I go into in one of my videos, but I'm not going to go into now. And this one is papilio. So this was recommended via several people, Rachel, Gardener Duensa, and then Michael, who doesn't have a channel. I'm sure many of you know him if you're kind of in the orchid circle of YouTube channels. So yeah, it's a brilliant recommendation because it is a fabulous plant. Just show you how big it is. It's nowhere near as big as the other that I've got next to it, which is a no ID one. I'll just kind of zoom up there to show you the difference in height. But it's a much more manageable height, to be honest. The one on the right it's okay in here, but if I had it in the house, it's quite tricky. And even though it's in a heavy clay pot, it is likely to topple over once all these blooms open up. I normally get 2 spikes on the one on the right and at least 4 blooms on each spike, but you never know until they come up. And these things get bigger every year because if you feed them and you keep them well looked after, they're not difficult to overwinter or over summer, depending on when you have the growing cycle set up for. But they do need at least a couple of months rest. Now, I always cut the leaves off. Some people do inform me that you can leave them and you will still get your flower spike. I don't know. I like to give them a rest, and they come back strongly after a couple of months break. I think that's what they do in the wild anyway, and it's always nice to copy what they do in the wild. But wow, what a fantastic bloom. Well worth a look at, even though that's not the subject of this video. So let's get on to what we're actually going to talk about today. Right, so we've gone from such a fantastic, beautiful bloom to this sorry looking specimen. Now, you've probably jumped on this video because you want to learn about the BURRAGEARA Nelly Isler. So first of all, before I explain myself here, this is sometimes known as Cambria Nelly Isler in the shops. It's an intergeneric hybrid. I've always known it as BURRAGEARA Nelly Isler, but of course the real name, the actual name these days anyway, is Oncidopsis Nelly Isler. So it is a plant of many parts, and it is actually a plant of many parts. That's what intergeneric means. It comes from many different, well, I don't know how many exactly, I've not looked it up, but it's easy enough to look up on orchids.org. You can find out what actually goes into the making of this plant. I believe Miltoniopsis is one of the main ones, and that's why people say you should treat it as a Miltoniopsis. But we'll get into the care conditions in a while. So that's the naming of it. This particular cultivar is Swiss Beauty. So this does not exist in the wild. This could not possibly exist in the wild because of the variety of genera of orchids that it comes from. However, having said that, it's still an absolute beauty. In fact, this one is Swiss Beauty. I've had a couple of spikes on this, and this one has a story behind it. And you can see it's not looking particularly clever at the moment. It's looking very sorry for itself. And if you scroll through my videos back to the 14th of March in 2020, last year, you'll find a very similar video. In fact, I bought this plant in July 2019, and it was in bloom for me for a long time, many months. And it was the winter of 2019 where things started to go south. So it's kept, for the most part anyway, in the cooler side at 12 degrees Celsius. Now, therein lies the problem. So last year I made that video and I put the theory out that 12 degrees Celsius was too low for it. Now, what happened then was I took it through to the warmer side. I made the video, talked about some of its care conditions, some of its care needs, and one or two people convinced me in the comments that what had actually happened to it was that the leaves had been burned by the sun. So at that point, because I think I put a couple of theories forward. One was that it was too cold for it, and the other one was that because it was early March, the sun had finally reached the benches of the greenhouse as it was getting higher in the sky, and at that point I hadn't yet put the shading up. Now, even though it was cold outside, the shading does provide some protection from sun through glass, even though the temperatures outside are cold, because through glass, as we know, it really amplifies that burning, heating effect. So we thought that it possibly was that it had been burnt by the sun, and that was kind of how we left it. But I think the experience over this winter has pretty much solidified in my mind that it was definitely the temperature that caused the problem. Of course, BURRAGEARA, or Oncidopsis, I'm going to call it from now on in, Oncidopsis don't like to be in the bright sun anyway, so that certainly wouldn't have helped. But I think if you think that they could go down to 12 degrees Celsius, what that doesn't take into account is that in my conditions, I've got them at 12 degrees Celsius for at least 3 months. They don't go any higher than that. They stay at that. And I think the thing with this is it is a true intermediate plant. And I think this is why it has this reputation of being particularly difficult to look after. Because people tend not to have intermediate conditions, do they? They have one or the other. They have it either cold in a greenhouse or like an external grow room, or something that's kind of tagged onto the side of the house that they don't really heat to a great temperature, high temperature. I know some people do, but what you tend not to find is people, for some reason, that keep their temperatures at about 15. It's either at about 12, because you can grow a great many plants, great many orchids at 12, or they'll heat it up to about 17, 18 degrees Celsius, and then they can grow a whole new range of carnivorous plants and orchids and tropical plants at those temperatures. You don't tend to find people that have it somewhere in between. And that's where the problem is for this. So obviously you can see this has been going like this, and it's actually been in bloom for the past 3 months, but it's been going like this since the temperatures went down to 12. It's been steadily going south with its leaves. And what happened when I brought it into the warmer side last year is that it started back into growth. I actually repotted it. It sent off these shoots in funny directions. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to chop what's left of that spike off. I'm going to unpot it. We'll have a look at what the roots are like. Now this year I'm hoping, I'm just looking at it's a little bit wobbly there, so maybe that one bit doesn't have any roots. This is actually 2 plants. There's 2 plants in here. That's how it came. I'm hoping that there's some new growth, and just spot one there, but we'll clean it all up, clean those sheaths up, the dead bits up, and have a good study of the roots. I'm hoping that it has got some roots, because it didn't last year, and I've been very careful this year to make sure that I have looked after it in terms of getting those roots to dry out. I'll talk about that in a second, because the standard advice on this is that because you treat them like a Miltoniopsis, it likes to be slightly moist. But of course that very much depends on your conditions, your particular microclimate. So what I'll do is I'll tidy everything up. I'm hoping to put it in some coconut husks as well, but it depends on, it actually hates salt, so that depends on the parts per million when I get those coconut husks out and give them a little test. So I'll set everything up and we'll dig into it and see what's going on. And while I'm doing that, we'll have a chat about the care conditions for this and what I'm going to do with it. And we're back. Okay, so what I'm going to try today, we have some coconut husks here. We've got a little bit of sphagnum and we've got some charcoal there. So once I've unpotted it, I'm going to put it back in the same pot because it's already got lots of holes in it. Actually, I'll probably put some more in the bottom of the pot. And I'm going to try some of this coconut husk. So the idea is that coconut husk lasts longer, it's sustainable, there's lots of it about. It's a bit of a pain, you've got to keep washing it. This is actually, just tested it, ppm of just under 100 parts per million, which is definitely not ideal, especially seeing as Oncidopsis don't like salt build-up. However, I don't see 99 as being particularly high. When I feed this orchid, I feed it at around about 200 anyway. So as long as I remember to flush it now and keep flushing it for a few times until I begin to feed it again. And I'm certainly not going to feed it looking at the state it's in at the moment, and I think that's going to be okay. So yeah, I'm going to use this because the latest little bit of advice that I have on this is that it lasts longer than bark. Yes, we said it's sustainable, but it also keeps holds water in a slightly different way than bark. Bark kind of keeps it not only within itself, but round the outside of it too. So if you're in a cold climate like I am, your orchid roots are prone to rotting off, and that's something that's been like a repeated thing with me and my orchids, even when they're kept at the higher temperatures of 18 degrees, because it can be very humid in here, then this is going to be better because it doesn't keep that moisture around the outside. It's kind of within the husk itself. For some reason, it seems to allow more air to circulate. A little bit of sphagnum because I don't want it to go completely dry. It's a fine balance, isn't it, really? And the charcoal, which is supposed to keep everything sweeter, and again it helps things dry out quickly a little bit more, and for me that is going to be an issue. Can you imagine, for example, if you happen to be in somewhere like Cyprus or a really hot dry country, and while we're talking about that, at the moment we have what we call a beast from the east. It only happens usually about once a year, and it's when we start to get the prevailing winds coming from the east. So we're talking about like northeast, so really the Arctic, I guess, areas which are much more northerly than we are here at 53 degrees. It's funny really, because I was talking to, on the chat of course, in the comments, another YouTuber who comes from New York, and that's Nicole. So if you have a look through my description for this video, I'll put a little link to her channel, see if we can give her a few more subscribers. She's doing really well there over in New York, and even though she's at a more southerly latitude than we are, they get far worse winters than we do, because of course I've talked about this before. This is all to do with our Gulf Stream, which keeps us a few degrees warmer. It just keeps us at a really boring, dull, nothing really much happens, only rain and cloud cover. However, I digress. So yeah, this beast from the east, it comes about once a year, and we get these really cold, dry winds. Probably about as cold as we normally get, but it feels more cold. The wind chill can take it down to, beyond -10. It can feel that cold, and it absolutely dries everything out. It's not humid like we normally get with our prevailing westerlies. So that means that anything that you've got in a pot dries out really, really quickly. And when I start gardening again and going around customers' gardens, and I see their pots, and I see plants like hebes in the ground that haven't been watered, and it kills them off. And it's only when we get this beast from the east. Some years we don't get it at all. In that sense, even though we can have a snowy winter, the snow is very wet, whereas now when we get the snow, it's very dry. It's a completely different kind of weather system. So let's get cracking on unpotting this and seeing what's actually gone on. So first thing to do is I'm going to cut off this old flower spike. It's done really well. It's kept producing beautiful blooms for me, beautiful flowers for me, but as you can see, things are not looking particularly good. So I last repotted this March in 2020, and let's see what's going on. I've not took it out since then. It's been in there. Well, you can see straight away that one still hasn't got any roots on it, even though it's bloomed. Now I don't think, yeah, it has. This one's bloomed. Isn't that so weird with orchids? I think it's definitely due a different media, to try a different media and see what happens with it. You wouldn't think that would survive, but there's a new growth there, and I'm sure I saw a new growth somewhere else. So there's a new growth down there. You can just about see it hiding behind that sheath. So maybe this bark might, coconut husk might actually help it. Let's see. Anything? Not looking good, I must say. It's looking very much like there's no roots on this one either, but we'll see anyway. Are they alive? Don't think so. Might be a couple of new ones under there, just about. Yeah, that's okay. So it's got something. So let's give it a clean out and give it a clean up. Shall we start with? I'll start with this. So I want to get all this rubbish off. I think there are some new roots. See the white ones there? They feel firm, they don't feel squishy, and they're not brown. I mean, it must be getting its moisture from somewhere. So yeah, it's very definitely, for me now, I'm convinced that what's happening with it is that as it's intermediate, it just can't cope with 12 degrees over like a extended length of time. And it's really been at this kind of temperature from November onwards. Yeah, there are some roots, that's good. These white ones are okay, but they've obviously not gone much further. Whether they've only recently died off, it's very difficult to, it's impossible to know. It's the usual dilemma. Do we cut all these off and give it absolutely nothing to hold on to it? I don't think I will actually, because they're not doing any harm. They are not like blocking any roots from coming. You've still got, you can see the white ones there, which are okay. They're coming through. I think it's better to have something to hold on to. So I'm going to leave those like that for now. I'm going to get rid of all these brown bits because they just look really unsightly. I mean, you wouldn't think how quickly, like you wouldn't think how nice it looked. Only really a matter of a couple of weeks ago. It's just really gone very, very quickly. And I really don't want to lose it because it's a lovely, lovely plant. So, what have we got? Look, well, there's a new growth there. So that one there, just exposed. That might come. I don't know whether that's dormant actually. It could start to come. This is obviously the old side of the plant. This is the newer side. Well, you won't think it looking at these leaves. So what happened last time, when I put it in the warmer side, all these leaves slowly died off one by one, and then I got the new growths, and it come back really strongly, but obviously didn't grow a great deal in terms of roots. So it's definitely not going in a bigger pot. It's going to stay in the same pot with this new mixture. And let's see if this new mixture does anything. So this one has no roots whatsoever, although you can see there are some new ones coming. Let's get rid of all the yucky bits. And I thoroughly expect all these leaves with black on them to eventually completely die off. And because it was all sticking at a funny angle, I want to try and get it a bit more upright in the pot. Although what's going to happen is we're going to get some new growths. They'll probably also grow at a funny angle. So if we expose that, I always wonder if you do take the sheaths off these things, whether that makes them, because you like exposing them to the light a bit more, aren't you? So whether that makes them hurry up a little bit more. As I say, I expect all these yucky bits to fall off anyway. I'm probably about 80% confident that I'm not going to lose it because it happened before. So I'm pretty confident that will come back and give me its blooms again. The thing about these intergeneric hybrids is because they've been bred for vigorous growth, then it's not as difficult for them to bounce back. Get the conditions right, and in my case it just simply means get the temperatures well above 12 degrees and then they'll be fine. What I'll do now, I'll get rid of all this rubbish and then clean the pot up, and then I'll show you the potting up and we'll talk about a few more of its care conditions. Okay, so we have same pot, cleaned up a little bit, a few more holes in the bottom. So yeah, I was actually started telling you this and then I went off as a tangent, as I normally do. Yeah, if you're in a hot country and you're told to pardon me, if you're in a hot country and you're told to treat something like a Oncidopsis, if that country is dry, as in you have prevailing winds like we have at the moment, these easterlies, which are really low in humidity, then you're going to treat that differently as opposed to if you're in a place like me. Because of course it's going to dry out much more quickly. If it's got sun on it, and okay, I don't mean absolute direct sun, but if the sun is warming that space, that greenhouse, that grow room, that you've got that Oncidopsis in, if the winds and the air is dry and nowhere near as humid, my point is, you can't just say treat it like a Miltoniopsis because it's different for everybody. It just gives you that little hint of what it likes. It likes to keep some kind of moisture, but it also likes some air around the roots. And if you bear that in mind, then you're going to have to do your watering and choose your media dependent on your own conditions. However, whatever media and whatever watering will keep it to slightly moist. I hope that makes some kind of sense. Okay, so as I've been talking about this, I'm thinking a little bit now to go a little bit more easy on the moss. I'm just going to put half of that in. So let's mix it together and then we'll pot it and see what it looks like. So we'll start off with a few coconut husks. This may well be my media of choice in future instead of bark. We'll see. I've even bought a sieve so that I can sieve out the, well, it's actually the coir bit, not the coconut husks. When it's been chopped a bit more finely and it's then called coir, then I will be able to sieve it and swap it and change it when I'm washing it, and that should help a little bit. So we'll take a little bit of this sphagnum moss here. I'm going to give it a bit of a rip up and tear up. Give it a bit of a mixture. Get some of this charcoal, sprinkle it on. Kind of like a magic mix, this, isn't it? Let's see what good it does. So I'll put a little bit in there, and I'm going to have to stuff these pseudo bulbs lower, otherwise they're not going to stand up. So we want new side. There's another new growth there, new side. So that's the old side. So that goes towards the middle. I'm not going to take them off yet because they're not blackened. Again, new side over here, new, and that can go towards the middle. I'm wondering whether actually, if I just take that last one off, somebody's probably screaming no, don't, then they just fit together a little bit nicer. And we'll squish that into there, place it into there, and we'll feed it around. I'm going to need a little bit more mixing up. I'm very excited to try this coconut husk because I've heard such good things about it. Obviously the biggest downside is the washing. The washing is, I have to admit, it really is an absolute pain. But once you've got your system set up, then it won't be too bad. And I've already got now, I know I've got this bucket full and it's at 100. Which I think, for me anyway, is an acceptable parts per million. The only time it wouldn't be is if I was going to use it for something like carnivorous plants, not the penthes. The penthes aren't that bothered, but things like Drosera. Things like the Drosera that I've just planted, the seeds. Which still haven't come up, by the way. I'm still waiting. Well, it has only been just over 2 weeks. So as far as care conditions go, and there's no way around that one, that's just going to have to stick out. So we've said watering, Miltoniopsis, fairly moist. Okay. I suppose I've got a bit of a dilemma here because I don't want to make it so squished in that it takes all the air out, which that was the whole point to using coconut husks in the first place, but yet because there's no roots, there's nothing to hold on to. So watering, we've said keep it fairly moist, but if you're in conditions like me, if you're in the north of England, then beware about that. You really need to let it dry out or be on the verge of drying out before you then go and water it again. Just be mindful that in the UK, in the north of England, very humid, very cold, despite whatever temperatures you might keep it at, it will rot easily. as will all orchid roots in my conditions. Temperatures, you really want it above 15. Yeah, it'll go down to 12. It'll go down to 12 for quite a length of time, but as we've seen, not for 3 months. So you really want to keep it higher. Even if it's only going down to 12 at night and it's going up to 15, 16 in the day, that'll probably be okay for it. Hate salt build up. I'm going to have to remember to flush this out a few times before I start feeding it again. I'll probably only start feeding it again once I get some real proper growth on it. It's not a heavy feeder. It likes the high humidity. Reasonably bright, but it's one of those that you can keep in a shadier spot. It's not really that fussy. It doesn't want to be in bright sunshine, that's for sure. And you need lots of holes in your pot if you are in the UK. That's definitely worth remembering. So I think that more or less covers it. Okay, so that's going to be added to all my other rescue plants. And what I really need to do is do a new label and write on the label that next year, come January, move it to the warmer side. Don't leave it at 12 degrees for month after month. So that's something for me to try and remember for next year. And just before I go, there is a new service appeared. If you look in the description, and it tells you a little bit about it. It's actually a consultation service. I'll go into greater detail about that. I'm sure there'll be a few sniggers from people. I'm not setting myself up as being an expert, but I do think I've got something to say and something to offer people if they're interested. And it will help hopefully cover the cost of the greenhouse and also give me a little outlet for my teaching skills that I really do miss. I've not been in the school now for over 10 years, and it would be great to get onto that and do a little bit of coaching maybe, or just have a general chat about people's setups and see if it's something that I can possibly help them with or help themselves with. So that's all linked to in the description. By all means, have a look at that and get in touch if you're interested. So for now, I'll see you on the next one. Bye.